This episode of The Candid Frame is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. The Charcoal Book Club is the monthly subscription service for photo book enthusiasts. Working with the most respected names in contemporary photography, Charcoal selects and delivers essential photo books to a worldwide community of collectors. Each month, members receive a signed first edition monograph and an exclusive print to add to their collections. Join the club by visiting charcoalbookclub.com and use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. What are you willing to do to make a photograph? Assuming that you have the equipment and experience you need, how far would you go to make that special image? How much time would you dedicate for the possibility of making that photograph? For British wildlife photographer Burrard-Lucas, it was a matter of years until he was finally able to photograph one of Africa's rarest big cats, the black leopard. In his book, The Black Leopard, he discusses the details of this challenge, as well as his many years creating stunning images of the continent's legendary animals, including lions, elephants, and more. He shares how his inventions of his unique camera buggy and traps opened the door to many of his classic photographs, including those of the black leopard. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. I'm enjoying the book.
Oh, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I commend you on your writing. It's a nice read.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was able to put a lot of effort into that side of it because I wrote it during lockdown. So suddenly everything else I had planned was sort of out the window, and I was able to dedicate a really nice amount of time to just, I guess, working the text, getting it nice and concise.
Yeah, I think it was a good time that if you were putting some sort of project off that didn't require you being out somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a good time to knock something like that out.
It was a really good project to keep me occupied, that's for sure.
Well, first off, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, your pursuit of making this image of this black leopard is really fascinating. I certainly want to spend a good amount of time talking about that, but I thought I'd start because in reading it, there were just a whole variety of challenges that you faced in terms of being able to make those images. And, you've had a lot of experience photographing a lot of different wildlife in a variety of different circumstances. Mm-hmm. What do you think were some of the skills and sort of the talents that you developed over the years that you feel like were invaluable towards making this set of particular images happen?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like, I feel like almost my whole life had been leading towards making these images. And actually, my journey towards achieving them started, more than a decade ago. And so it was really as I was getting into wildlife photography that I started really experimenting with different equipment and different techniques, and started this journey where I found myself often developing equipment that would allow me to get these shots that I had in mind, and often making up techniques. And as I was doing this, I became fascinated with working at night and photographing nocturnal wildlife. I became really interested in camera traps, which you can talk about some more. All of these things that I'd sort of focused on during the years. When it came to this black leopard project, suddenly they were all applicable, and really, it was a culmination of so many strands of my life coming together. I guess just pursuing the opportunity in the first place, I'd set myself up in Kenya, really. I'd been working on some camera trapping projects in Kenya. I developed a whole network of contacts and friends who were sort of, I guess, who I could sort of get ideas from in terms of projects and things. And so this journey where I'd focused increasingly on Africa and then more recently on Kenya kind of culminated me hearing about this black leopard and then having all the means in place to actually try and do something about it. Because, if it had been in some random country, the logistics involved in just, getting out there with all the camera gear for something so speculative, it probably wouldn't have happened. And, to be honest, when I heard about this leopard and actually went out there to try and photograph it, for me, it was kind of so speculative and kind of such a long shot that I actually didn't expect to achieve the results to capture anything. But fortunately, because I was in the right place at the right time with my equipment and my car and things out there, I was able to, justify giving it a go, seeing what I could get. And, if worst came to worst, it was worth giving it a go to get something so special. But, obviously you've got to take these sort of chances and I guess back yourself to try and do something special, like photograph this animal that is so rare. And it all came together, as I said.
When I was reading about the time you were in India, photographing another type of black leopard, one of the things that really fascinated me and that I really had never thought of was having a sensitivity to the calls of the various animals that could be preyed on. The birds, some of the other monkeys or other mammals. And that was fascinating for me. I had never really heard about a photographer paying attention to those things as a cue that a predator is nearby. I really would love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, for sure. I guess photographing wildlife in Africa, it is often the predators that people most want to see photos of, that people get most excited about. But, the density of predators compared to other animals is actually very low. For every 100 prey species, that might be able to support one predator. So often when you're driving around or walking around, you're very unlikely to see a predator, but you do see a lot of these other animals. It was mostly during this year that I spent living in Zambia. I spent a lot of time with guides, and a lot of their bushcraft rubbed off on me during that year. And I learned how to listen to the various calls from different creatures, and recognize which of the calls were potentially an alarm call. And by listening out for those particular calls, particularly from fairly common species like monkeys and guinea fowl and certain antelope, by really just keeping an ear out for those sounds. Often if you hear that animal has seen something, usually a predator, and by following the calls, not always, but sometimes, you get lucky and you find the predator that the animal had been spooked by.
In the book, you talk about getting information from people who lived in the area or worked in the area that they had spotted this big cat. And this was sort of a lead-in for the possibility of you being able to photograph it. But while you were there were other things that you were looking at, like paths, animal paths that were frequently traveled, or water sources. It's still a big territory to have to consider in terms of where you're going to place your camera and where you're going to dedicate your time. So since the leopard was so elusive to begin with, talk about, making the decision of where to put the camera traps to increase the likelihood that you would be able to make even one image.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so many of my projects nowadays are really this collaborative approach where really I'm relying on these people that live with these wildlife, these wild animals, really understand them better than I could do just as a visitor visiting for a few months. These people have spent their entire lives with these creatures, and really I'd have no chance often of getting what I want without teaming up with them, and be that scientists or researchers, guides, or members of the local community. And in the case of this project, my sort of first point of contact was this safari company called Laikipia Wilderness Camp. And I'd heard that people there had occasionally been seeing this black leopard. So they were the people I contacted. And then they introduced me to the landowner, this lady called Louisa. And it was her and her team of rangers that had been seeing this leopard on her land. And so I was introduced to them. They showed me around. And it turned out they'd also been showing some leopard researchers from San Diego Zoo, helping them record this leopard as well for their sort of scientific papers. And so when I got there, I was able to speak to all these people, find out, where they'd been seeing black leopard every now and then, where the scientists had managed to record it as well. And so from that, I was able to build up a rough picture of, the sort of areas this leopard was most likely to be frequenting. But then also from my point of view, I was wanting to pick compositions for my photos that were obviously sort of artistic and striking and things, and areas that I knew I could light dramatically, that sort of thing. And so I was really pulling in all of this sort of information, trying to pick the sites that would both give me the most pleasing photos, but also the most chance of capturing the shot I want. And often there is a bit of a trade-off between going for a particular photo that I want to get, but maybe it's not going to be the most productive location. So in the early stages, I was perhaps choosing places that were slightly more likely to get the leopard. But then as the project progressed, I started to try and get more and more difficult shots where the chances were lower.
Talk about why this particular cat is rare, because it's not like it's another species. It's still within the this family of animals. But what results in that particular look, and how rare is it actually?
So leopards themselves, they're not particularly endangered, but they are very elusive, and often they can be in an area and you just have no chance of seeing them because they are so shy, also quite nocturnal. So just seeing them can be pretty tricky. But then black leopards are basically a gene mutation, it's a recessive gene. And so in areas where the gene is more prevalent, you get a higher incidence of black leopards. But it's still, because it's a recessive gene, even if both the parents have the gene, there would only be like a 25% chance of one of their cubs being black. And these black leopards, they're generally recorded in areas that are more thickly forested. So places like Thailand and Malaysia, the leopards range is all the way through Africa and Asia. And these thickly forested areas where it's dark, maybe being a black cat in those situations could even be an advantage. And so maybe that gene has prevailed more there, and black leopards are more common in those habitats. But in Africa, particularly arid areas and open areas where, there's a lot of pale grass and, not a lot of these deep shadows, being a black animal in those sort of places is not really an advantage at all. And so I think for that reason, black leopards are much rarer in Africa than in the forested areas in other parts of the world. So, I've read different things about how many black leopards there might be in the world. And in some places, I think it's as high as 25%, but I think more on average, it might be more around 11%, but probably less than that in Africa. And, in Laikipia, this area I was working, there might be a handful at any one time. That combined with how shy the leopards are, very few people see them, even if you spend your whole life in that part of the world. For most of the local people in the area that I was working, this was the first time they'd seen a black leopard, and they'd been there their whole lives. So, they still are incredibly rare.
There's an old joke about, if you want a challenge, try to photograph a black cat in a dark room. And this is about as close as you can get.
Oh yeah, that was a real challenge. Just figuring out how to light it, because it really reflected so little light at all. I was getting normal leopards and black leopards on my camera traps, and I was finding to actually be able to see the shape of the leopard's body, I was having to expose 2 stops brighter than for a spotted leopard, just because it just hardly reflected anything. It's just those eyes that you would see often.
So how would you contend with that? Because you have a trap set up and you really don't know what's going to pass in front of the camera. And with some of the images, you are not only trying to get the cat, but you're also trying to get some of the environment, the ambient light. Yeah. So if you're having overexposed 2 stops just for the cat, I saw that you had other images of other wildlife, including other cats. So how do you sort of contend with that?
I was always primarily going for the black leopard, so all my settings were really optimized for him. And then other stuff came along, and I got a decent photo. That was a bonus. But all my settings were really optimized for the black leopard. And I was doing a lot with snoots and stuff, so that I wasn't exposing much of the foreground and vegetation. I was often quite focusing the light just on where the animal would be. And the way my camera trap sensors work is I can pick a very tightly defined area where the sensor's pointing and where all the lights focus. And I pretty much know exactly where the animal will be when it triggers the camera. So that does allow me to really just focus the light on where I expect the animal to be, and not have it spill out everywhere. Through that and a lot of trial and error, really, I sort of figured out the best settings. But also shooting in RAW, you do often have a stop or 2 of leeway if the exposure doesn't quite work.
You've used these traps with elephants and with lions and things like that. What sort of adjustments or changes did you have to make, considering not just the subject, but the environment you were in, and also the fact that you were leaving those traps there for extended periods of time?
Yeah, this was definitely the longest term camera trapping project I'd worked on. Previously, I'd done one that's maybe 3 months long, but it was actually over a year that my camera traps are running. So that was the biggest change. And figuring out how to keep them running all year when I wasn't necessarily there. I actually ended up working with a couple of the local rangers, a guy called Mohammed and another guy called Patrick, and trained them up basically to sort of keep the cameras clean, pick up the flashes if they got knocked over or anything like that. And so really it was their help that was crucial to allowing me to keep this on for so long. And then I would then visit, this was in 2019 when we could still travel quite freely. I would go out to Kenya every 6 weeks to 2 months, really, to move the traps around, and try and get different shots and keep them running that way. And then, the other part, I guess, is keeping them powered for that long. Big batteries, a few solar panels and things, and that sort of took care of that side of things.
When you talk about the solar panels, that's one of the things I was curious about. And it's like, because it seemed from reading the book that some of the areas may have been dense with foliage, and the weather can be kind of unpredictable. So especially with leaving those things out there for an extended period of time, sort of finding a balance between positioning in terms of getting a good shot, but also getting enough power so that if the batteries do die out, you do have enough power for the camera.
Yeah. Well, I guess, this is on the equator, so it does get quite a lot of sunlight. And then the other side of it is the camera trap equipment, in order to be usable in all sorts of habitats and ecosystems, it has to be incredibly power efficient. So actually none of it was designed to be used with solar panels, and everything from the wireless flash triggers, the flashes, everything has really been optimized to be very, as efficient as possible in terms of that power consumption. So really to keep them going for longer periods, you don't need a lot of power out of the solar panel just to keep it basically running indefinitely. Basically, it would be the memory card filling up would probably be the thing that would limit how long it could keep going. By that point, there'd usually be other things as well, like termites had somehow got in, or spider had built its web over the lens or something like that. So typically, I only need them to go 6 weeks or so before I'd come back, and usually have to move them anyway.
You had several false starts before you finally got your first photograph, which I'm sure was kind of disheartening. But tell me about the moment when you realized that you actually had gotten not only a photograph of it, but a photograph that was usable, that was good.
Yeah. So, I mean, actually in the terms of my camera trapping projects to date, I'd had so many, I guess, disappointments over the years where you set up really excited about a potential camera trap location, a stunning backdrop, animal trail that seems busy. You set up and then, weeks go by and you don't capture what you wanted. So I come to view camera trapping like, I have no expectations when I'm checking my camera. Really, with this project, after a couple of nights, I hadn't got the black leopard yet. I got a few other species, actually some quite exciting species like this striped hyena. Obviously, I was checking the cameras, hoping to get the black leopard. But after 3 or 4 nights, I really didn't have a big expectation because, my experiences to date, sometimes it'd taken a month or more just to get a photo of a rhino in an area stuffed full of rhinos. So when I did check the camera on, I think it was the 4th day, I really wasn't expecting to see a black leopard on it. And it was the last camera I checked, scrolling through and always just flicking through quickly just to get it done. And then I could close up the camera and head off back to camp. But then I got to this photo and, I almost missed it because the photo was just black. And it was a tiny little DSLR camera screen that I was looking at the back of, and it was quite bright light. And I just saw these 2 spots in the middle, basically in this completely black area. And, had to do a double take and peer closer. And then it suddenly hit me that they were 2 eyes in an animal that was completely black in the middle of the night. And, it didn't sink in. And it was probably a few days before, the implications of what I'd captured really did start to sink in. And thereafter, it was just like a dream, particularly as I continued to get photos over the next few weeks.
What did you learn from that first photograph that helped the subsequent images that you captured in terms of the technical stuff, in terms of capturing the cat, or where you would need to go and and what sort of adaptations you would need to make to get more than one?
Obviously, the trail where I first got that cat, I realized that was obviously a productive spot. So I moved some cameras there. And the second and third image I got were again on that trail. That first photo was actually an infrared photo. So I wasn't sure how sensitive and how shy the leopard was going to be. So some of the camera traps I'd set up were infrared converted cameras with infrared flashes. So they are only emitting sort of invisible infrared light. But pretty soon I discovered that he didn't seem to mind the color camera traps at all. So I only kept those infrared camera traps running for a few weeks before I swapped them all for color ones. So most of the pictures thereafter were in sort of full color. He was still a young male when I started photographing him, and then following him for the course of a year. Actually, over that time, his behavior changed quite a lot. The areas he started to use shifted quite a lot over that time. So really, I'd sort of think I had good spots selected, and then suddenly a few weeks go by and I found I had to move them around. So it kind of was this whole learning curve that, and as the seasons changed, as the rains arrived, his habits would change completely. So really it was a case, all the way through the project of sort of trying to keep tabs on what he was doing and sort of responding appropriately.
What was it like to have an in-person contact with him? And how long was it after you had made the first image that you had that experience?
Yeah, that was incredible. And as I'd sort of started working on this as a long-term project, I'd obviously really hoped I would eventually see him with my own eyes. But as long as I was getting photos, obviously I was going to keep working on the project. But it was in April. I'd started in January, so it was 4 months into the project, and he'd actually disappeared for, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks. I hadn't got any photos of him, but I had still been getting some quite nice shots of these spotty leopards. So I was still persevering with the project, but I was wondering if he'd moved off completely and if I'd actually got my last photo of him. But I was up at my camera traps at dusk. Often I'll go to the camera traps when it's quite dark, because it's obviously the best time to be able to preview the lighting and the flashes. So I'll often be up when it's pretty dark, and that's obviously the time that leopards start to move around. And I was up with my camera traps. It had gotten really dark now. And just as I was finishing up with this camera, I shone my flashlight over sort of some rocks about 50 meters away. And I saw these eyes reflecting light back at me. And by the spacing of the eyes, I could be pretty sure it was a leopard. There's not that many other animals in this area that have such widely spaced eyes. So I thought it was a leopard, but I thought it was one of the spotty leopards that I'd been capturing on my cameras. So I started to slowly go towards it, hoping to get a better view. And as I got closer and closer, the animal still wasn't resolving for me, or I could still just see the light reflected as it was watching me, but I couldn't see the shape of the animal at all. And I then got about halfway, closed the distance by about half, and that's when the cat started to move. And as it moved, then all of a sudden I could make it out, and it was basically just a black shape cut out from the sort of scenery behind that was illuminated by my torch, kind of like a silhouette. That's when I realized that it was a black leopard. And yeah, so I mean, I don't quite know how long the experience was, but I'd probably spent a few minutes slowly trying to get close to him, and then he moved off, went into the undergrowth and disappeared.
Are they pretty skittish about humans?
Yeah, so leopards are pretty shy usually. At night they're bolder, and because I had the light on him, I don't think he could see me. So I guess it's only when he sensed that I was getting closer that he moved off. But yeah, leopards are pretty shy mostly.
When I've talked to some of my photographer friends recently, some of the best conversations have revolved around recent photo book acquisitions. We were inspired to share why a particular photographer's work had made such an impression on us. It wasn't just that we admired the work, but that the photographer opened our eyes to new choices and different ways of seeing. That's what I hope for with each new photo book I purchase. I'm looking for an experience that will thrill me and will challenge the way I see and make photographs. The best books are the ones that I return to over and over again. Every photographer who I respect and admire has a collection of books that does that for them. It's the reason why I recommend you become a member of the Charcoal Book Club. Whether you are a seasoned collector or just getting started, Charcoal provides an amazing selection of monographs of all genres that nurture your love for great photography. These special first edition books are carefully curated, showcasing some of the best talents in contemporary photography. The production behind these books is top-notch, and it's obvious as you hold your copy in your hands and begin turning the pages. If you want to find a new and different way to further propel your photography, the best decision is to become a Charcoal Book Club member today. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. And if you're not feeling that month's selection, you can swap it out for a different one of similar value. Visit their website to see what they have to offer and what you have to look forward to. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today, and remember to use the code TheCandidFrame at checkout to receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. I know you're big about conservation, but I'm curious in terms of the habitat and the area in which this cat exists. Because I know that there was a woman whose home was sort of a central point from which you started. Tell me about the area around it. How large is it?
Yeah.
And who is it protected by?
Yeah, so Laikipia is a slightly interesting case in Kenya in that it's not really, there's no national parks there. It's a lot of conservancies, so privately owned land. It's got sort of this patchwork of conservancies, and most of these conservancies are either farming or tourism or this sort of mix of both. This corner where the black leopard was actually bordered 3 different conservancies plus the private land that, Louisa's land, which is where I was mostly based. And yeah, these areas are sort of private. They have security because, they do have wildlife. All of them to an extent have tourism, people coming to see the wildlife. And then they also have a certain amount of the land, most of the time, set aside for like cattle grazing and livestock grazing. So it is very much mixed use, and it's quite a nice example of kind of land being able to support wildlife, but also used by local communities for their purposes. But yeah, it is a delicate balance, and there's certainly challenges, predators sometimes killing livestock and conflict arising that way. But for the most part, I think local people are very proud of their wildlife, and particularly something special like the black leopard. They do feel that sense of pride and, certainly excited about the sort of international fame that this leopard in their area got. So yeah, mostly they're very much on board with protecting the wildlife. They see the benefits of tourism and income, coming into the area through, visitors. So it's a delicate balance, but it seems to be working.
Your picture was the first scientific documentation of the leopard in 100 years. Though other people had made sort of casual photographs of others, and it created quite a stir, probably more than you had anticipated.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, I certainly couldn't have anticipated it the way it went. So the way that all sort of came about is, as I said, when I got to Laikipia, it turned out some scientists had also been there. Basically, they were researching leopards in the whole of Laikipia, but then they'd heard about the black leopard and started to record him because, in the scientific record, it was so rare to have black leopards in Africa, and there was no mention of black leopards in the scientific record for over 100 years. So these scientists, for them, they were able to compile a scientific paper revealing the existence of this black leopard to sort of break that streak of 100 years. And it turned out that I got there and started getting my photos before they'd published their results. And so they asked me, can you not publish your photos until we publish our findings? And, maybe we could team up and release our results at the same time. And I let them use some of my photos for their paper. And so it's through my partnership with them that, my photos in tandem with their research, constituted the first scientific documentation of a black leopard in Africa in over 100 years, even though, as you say, other people had been seeing them, obviously, and there were snapshots taken by other people over that time. But yeah, so that headline, though, that came out, first documentation in 100 years, plus my very striking photos, did just go completely crazy when they were released. And it was just mad for a couple of weeks with press all over the world, publishing the pictures. I don't think there was a country, where there wasn't some sort of coverage. And, I've got friends all over the world who saw it. So it was pretty crazy, really. And again, that's another part of it that's kind of a bit like a dream, just the way that went. But yeah, thereafter, I then continued to work on the project for the rest of that year and very much kept the photos under wraps and and a bit lower key after that.
This is not the first time your images have caused quite a stir. You created this sort of contraption in which you had a camera that was on wheels and allowed for amazing proximity to wildlife, especially elephants and lions. And that comes from your experience in physics and electronics, and having that knowledge that usually isn't available to the average outdoor photographer. Talk about applying that, that background, and it resulting in sort of your unique approach to making images.
As you mentioned, I sort of have a technical science background, and while I didn't study things like electronics particularly or programming, I think it gave me enough of a technical grounding to then be able to teach myself quite a lot of these things. And so when it came to applying it to my photography, it always started with an end photo in mind. And then if I needed to build something to be able to achieve that, then I would do that. So this is now like 2008, 2009, as I was kind of experimenting with wildlife photography, trying to capture things that were just a bit different, that weren't, the commonplace wildlife photos. I got really obsessed, really interested in getting closer, using a wide angle lens to get a much more intimate perspective. And it was a perspective that really I fell in love with. It felt like you could lean into the picture and touch the subject, being close up and wide angle. And so I'd done this with animals that I could crawl up to, animals like penguins and meerkats. But I really dreamed of doing it with these big charismatic animals in Africa. And obviously I couldn't crawl up to them. So for me, the solution was kind of obvious, to try and build a remote control buggy, put my camera on that and use that to get the camera close. And so I decided just to try it. I taught myself what I needed to learn in terms of sort of remote control, hobby remote control stuff, built the buggy, took it out to Tanzania. And that first trip, I got just enough to prove the concept. The camera was destroyed after 2 days by a lion, but I sort of learned my lesson, learned that, if I could lion proof it, I would be able to get some pretty intimate images of lions. It was then a couple of years before I revisited it with a lion-proof version, managed to get the lion photos, and they were well received and widely published. And ever since, really, I've come back to the BeetleCam when I've wanted that close-up perspective. So again, when I started photographing wildlife with stars behind, the BeetleCam again gave me that perfect perspective, looking up at the animal with the sky behind. And so every few years, it seems I end up finding another application for it. That, I guess, inventiveness and willingness to, build equipment then led to me creating my camera trap system, which is what I ended up applying to this Black Leopard project. And, nowadays, if ever I've got a photo that I can't think of any way to create with the existing equipment, then I'll happily, try and hack something together to sort of do what I need it to do.
That's quite a skill that you can put on your CV, can make things lion-proof.
Yeah, well, that was a challenge. And actually, even the ones that were lion-proof weren't particularly. The latest version, which I created just last year, is now completely metal, and so far hasn't suffered any sort of maulings. But it's been quite a long process to try and to make these things robust enough.
When you're thinking about the things you want to do next in terms of different subject matter or different regions that you want to explore, are you thinking about, is part of the allure the challenge that particular choice provides you? Is that part of the sort of the excitement for you?
I guess it comes down to showing people things that they haven't seen before. So maybe it's going to some quite maybe obscure place that maybe is just opening up, and I can see there's an opportunity to go take photos there that people haven't seen before. Or it's a species or an idea I have for how I can photograph it, maybe at night or maybe in some other way that would result in something, fresh and different. And so, and also that, there are places that I just want to see or animals that I just really want to focus on. And now that my leopard project's finished, I've decided I'm going to revisit lions, because they're a subject that I sort of have neglected for quite a few years now. And they're one of the subjects that, I became known for with those early BeetleCam photos. And I feel now with the technology and my sort of ideas for taking photos at night, I feel it's worth now revisiting Lions, and hopefully I'll be able to get something, particularly at night, that might be a bit different.
One of the interesting things about your work is the time involved, not just in setting things up and planning, but in terms of just being patient and waiting to see whether or not you get anything. And, I know there was a moment in there where you weren't getting something and the idea was, well, do I move? Do I uproot and move this somewhere else? And, for me as a street photographer, I often have that thought, but sometimes my span of time is probably 15 minutes to 45 minutes, not days, weeks, and months. Tell me about, those considerations where you've got everything set up the way, you've done as much research as you can, and now it's just serendipity and luck that you're trying to rely on to give you something. Tell me about those moments where you're really hard pressed to make that decision.
It's funny, camera trapping is like that. You can increase your chances by leaving stuff for longer. You can increase your chances by setting up more camera traps, and you can increase your chances by, I guess, really understanding the subject, or at least working with people who really understand the subject. But at a certain point, you just have to decide, am I going to keep trying to improve on this photo, or am I going to either draw a line under the project or keep going with it? On the other side of the coin, the good thing about camera trapping is you can set up those cameras and then leave them running while you go off and do other things. And so often I would be with the cameras for a few days, and then I'd actually go off and go to a different part of Kenya and work on something else while those camera traps are running. So it's not like for that whole year I'm just sat there tending my camera traps. And so I was able to sort of revisit them frequently, but actually do other things. And really, with something so exciting as this black leopard, I couldn't really imagine ever stopping the project. As long as there was a chance that I could still get something different, some new photos, then I was going to, it's worth it keeping those cameras running just to see what I could get. And indeed, after COVID, I went back out there and reset up some cameras and got a few new shots because it turns out he is still around roughly the same area. And I think, I just love him as a subject so much that I think I will probably never quite end it. But, obviously my focus will then shift. And I guess something I've learned really since that year in Zambia is that you really do need to put in the time to start taking your work to the next level. Once you visit a place, you might go there for 2 weeks even, that's only just the start of a project often. That's when you then can go home, think about the place or the subject you were photographing, and then start to come up with, interesting ideas maybe to try and get something a bit different. And so often now I'll be revisiting places time and time again as I'm trying to build a portfolio of pictures. And typically now I'll focus on a project for a year or two with a view to maybe then doing another book at the end of it. And there might be smaller projects in between, but that's where I've sort of found that I like to work, is really just immerse myself in one thing at a time and keep going with it.
So what is your photographic business made up of? I know that you teach workshops and you license your images, and exactly, how does that look?
Yeah. So I've pretty much experimented with so many different things over the years. And that's, I guess, one of the hallmarks of what I like to do is, I'll try everything and see what sticks and sort of run with that. Nowadays, workshops aren't really a big part of what I do. I was running 1 or 2 a year just for variety, really. But building a business around it, you really need to commit to it. And it wasn't really for me. So I'm happy to do a few. But no, what I really focus on is my Camtraptions company. So those products I created, those devices I created for my own photography, the camera traps, I then turned those into products for other photographers as well. So that's quite a big focus of mine when I'm not traveling is building that business up and developing new products and equipment for that. And often my projects like this Black Leopard project are doing really the marketing for that business because I'm using the Camtraptions equipment and sort of showing what you can get with it. So it's very closely obviously linked to my photography. So that's the sort of Camtraption side. And then on my own photography side, as I mentioned, I'm now trying to basically just work on long-term book projects. So I'll work on a project for a couple of years with a view to doing a book at the end of it. And really with my own photography projects, I kind of see them now as brand building more than how I make my living. And, I can work on a speculative project like the Black Leopard, and I don't have to worry really if there's not a positive ROI on it, because at the end of the day, I have got my Camtraptions to fall back on. But it does allow me to be much freer about, the projects I do work on. And I don't have to really worry if it's going to make a lot of money at the end of it, because I'm lucky now in that the sort of Camtraptions thing has sort of given me that freedom to an extent.
Well, with the contraptions business, you have two young children who you're raising along with your wife. Mm-hmm. Tell me about, planning ahead in terms of when you do want to travel, when you want to spend extensive time. I know that you as a family spent time in Africa during mm-hmm. part of the time that you were working on this particular project. But tell me, just like overall, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's definitely been one of the biggest challenges I've faced over the years, is how to allocate that time between traveling into the wilds where you're sort of cut off, keeping Camtraptions running and growing, and obviously spending time with family. And so we were quite, I guess, intentional about how we set up the projects in Africa, in that we did decide to focus on Kenya, sort of get a more permanent setup there, in that we bought a car and leave a lot of gear out there. And then my wife then she's a doctor. She became a locum, which allows her to basically freelance. So she can basically not book work for long periods. And it means we can spend pretty much the entire school holidays out in Africa as a family together. So that gives me, a good 3 or so months out in the field without necessarily being apart from my family. On the Camtraptions side, really the sort of key that unlocked it all was when my brother then came on board, and he was actually able to start running Camtraptions day to day. And actually that then freed me up to sort of go off grid if I needed to. And so, it's sort of been quite a journey, and sort of figured out one step at a time. But, there's certainly been times like 2016, for example, I hardly traveled at all that year because we just had a baby. Camtraptions was taking so much of my time. And really, my photography sort of came to a standstill. And obviously then COVID again, that was another sort of thing where suddenly the photography, but fortunately, the photography projects ended, but fortunately I had the Camtraptions stuff to put my energies into. So I guess it's sort of, remaining flexible in a way. And that's the key.
You mentioned having COVID providing you ample time to write and put out this book.
Yeah.
But has there been a particular place in mind that you've, after all, 9 or 10 months or however long it's been for you in terms of being subject to COVID, you're thinking about, I can't wait to go to a particular place?
Yeah, well, as I said, I've sort of got my setup in Kenya with my car and stuff. And I was lucky that in November I was able to get out to Kenya. And I've actually spent now 2 months since COVID struck. I managed to spend 2 months out in Kenya, which really recharged my batteries and got started on this new lion project. And so now that I've sort of started this lion project, I'm kind of raring to get on with it and get back out there again. But it's right now things are getting difficult again. So I don't quite know how long that's gonna go on. Hopefully within a couple of months I'll be able to get back out there and keep working on that.
We talked earlier about the challenge that you like that about your work. Having had to photograph the lions before, what are you hoping to do differently with this latest work?
I'll be working in a couple of different areas, one of which in the Rift Valley is pretty remote and quite stunning scenery, really. And I'm hoping that by photographing lions in that scenery, the photos aren't going to be the familiar photos of lions that you see from elsewhere. You can sort of get a sense from the scenery that, this is a very harsh, arid environment. So in one sort of strand, it's going to be trying to work in some of these more unusual places. And then also, as I mentioned, trying to do a lot more at night. So lions are essentially nocturnal in their habits. Most of what they do happens at night. And I feel there's a huge opportunity to try and capture more of that side of their lives and really, show off, what it is lions do when they are in their element. And that's the night.
How are your images used? Are they used by some of the conservancies that you work with? Are they licensed by, commercial properties? How do you sort of leverage their existence?
I'm mostly taking them with an idea of doing the book at the end of it, but often I am partnered with a conservation organization, tourism entity or something when I'm actually capturing the photos. So often I'll share the photos with them. So, for example, my elephant project, which was the one before, I was partnered with the Savo Trust in Savo, and we were very much working together in that they pretty much, I wouldn't have got any of the photos without their help. And then, I let them use some of the images. I basically put together a book that really communicated their goals and did that very much in partnership with them. And so, if I could do those two things, there's some sort of conservation outcome that's benefiting from my photos, and I'm able to then, work towards a book. That's most of what I aim to do. Occasionally I am licensing pictures, mostly for editorial use and selling prints and things, but that's very much something I'm more passive about. I've really focused on building up the body of work for the book at the end of it.
This book is not just about the black leopard. It's really about, your life up until this point, your early fascination with travel and with wildlife, and eventually, picking up a camera and then finding a way for you to become a working professional photographer. And a lot of those ideas can, and those memories can exist in your head, but there's a very different experience when you sit down and start putting it to paper. As you started telling your story on the page, was there anything that you rediscovered or that surprised you?
Yeah, it's funny because, this book, I actually intended it to just be a photo book of the black leopard pictures. But as I mentioned previously, suddenly as the project was progressing, it did feel like so many strands of my life had come together for this project that, and when I sort of was talking to the publishers as well, they recognized it and, encouraged me to actually make this book the whole story leading up to the black leopard. And so, to tell that story, I did start right at the beginning, and it was really quite a challenge to figure out what to put in it, what was relevant and what to leave out. And that's one of the reasons it took me so long to write it, was to really try and boil down just the key parts along that journey that then led to the black leopard. And so it was certainly, I think it would have been very hard for me to actually do it had it been a non-COVID year when I was traveling here, there and everywhere. But actually having that lack of distractions, lack of temptations to travel, just being at home, living a very simple existence. And actually that gave me a lot of time and space to really condense my thoughts, I guess, and then put them down on paper. And I certainly enjoyed that, because in my normal life, or my pre-lockdown life, I just would never have had the time. So being able to really take my time with this book is probably, one of the things I enjoyed most about it.
You didn't make any sort of have a different perspective on your life?
I don't know. Like, I guess the way it suddenly all came together for this project, maybe I didn't even recognize it as it was happening, but then starting to look back at it and consider the book, it did suddenly, how all these different projects I'd worked on, from the animals at night, the camera traps, the BeetleCam, the Savo project, how it all suddenly came together for me, being in the right place at the right time to get this black leopard. I think that really crystallized as I was putting the book together. And it's then to culminate in these amazing pictures. It's I guess for me, like, how do I even follow on from this? What will I ever find subject wise and opportunity wise that will be a worthy follow up? So that's now the next challenge.
Well, I'm sure the universe will find a way.
Hopefully. Touch wood.
Well, my last question, which I ask each guest, is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Oh my gosh, there's so many photographers I admire, particularly, those that I guess broke ground in camera trapping and wildlife photography. To pick just one is pretty difficult. I think in the context of this project, it has to be Steve Winter, who's an Nat Geo photographer who really took camera trap photography, I guess, to new places with some of his projects that, from 10, 20 years ago, photographing snow leopards in the Himalayas and tigers and various other creatures. So, yeah, I think, if you sort of enjoy seeing my pictures of the black leopard and things, I think you'll also enjoy looking at Steve Winter's pictures. And yeah, he's just done some incredible work over the years.
Well, thank you very much, Will. I'm enjoying your book and really enjoyed having the chance to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And thanks to you who have financially supported The Candid Frame. Your belief in what we do means the world to us and has helped us so much. If you haven't yet, you can help contribute to our work by becoming a Patreon supporter today. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/thecandidframe. Just $5 a month from you makes a big difference. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. Thanks to Will for joining us. You can find out more about him and his work by visiting willbl.com. If you're a devoted listener and subscribe to the show, write us a review on whatever service you listen to podcasts. Those reviews have allowed us to grow. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. Thanks to Cosme Perez, Caitlin Just, Ayapan Nair, Sunhill Sippy, and Brenda Barkey for their recent contributions. I'm also going to be leading my Using Your Life to Jumpstart Your Photography online workshop this summer. Find out more by clicking on the link on the website in the show notes or visit nobechicreative.com. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge in another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode on the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, which is available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.